Welcome to our podcast, Education Without Borders, 21st Century Challenges. This podcast explores the critical issues facing education today, aiming to foster understanding and innovative solutions. Today, we delve into Episode 1, Translanguaging and Educational Justice in Rural Contexts.
Hello everyone, welcome to Education Without Borders, the podcast where we explore the most urgent challenges in 21st century education. I'm Kth-hola, an English teacher working in rural contexts.
And I'm Julia Darisa, an elementary school teacher. In this space, we talk about what's really happening in our classrooms and how we can transform education to make it truly inclusive and equitable.
Exactly, Julia. And today, we are going to discuss a topic we are passionate about and witness every day in our schools: linguistic and cultural diversity as an educational challenge that's directly connected to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
That's right, we'll explore Sustainable Development Goal 4, Quality Education, and Development Goal 10, Reduce Inequalities. But before we dive in, Catalina, tell us, what sparked your interest in this topic?
Well, Juliet, it all started when I began working at a rural school in Candelaria Valle del Cauca. There, I found a classroom full of stories: Afro-Colombian students with Pacific Coast accents, young Venezuelan migrants who still miss their homeland, and all of them trying to learn English with methods that didn't recognize their own language and cultures.
That sounds very familiar, and that's precisely the challenge we want to talk about today: the gap between standardized educational policies and the linguistic and cultural reality of our students.
Exactly. Look, according to recent research, monoglossic ideologies, that is, the idea that there is only one correct way to speak, end up characterizing varieties and accents. Students from racialized populations or migrants are labeled as a deficient sample for speaking differently.
And that has serious consequences, right? Not just in their academic performance.
Absolutely. It affects their motivation, their participation, their identity. Imagine a child who grows up speaking with expressions from their Afro-Colombian community, or a young Venezuelan woman with her Caribbean accent. They arrive in the English classroom and are told, "That's not how you speak," that they need to correct their Spanish before learning English.
It's like telling them your way of being isn't valid here, and that reproduces historical inequalities. That's why this challenge is so connected to Sustainable Development Goal 10.
So, let's talk about those connections. Sustainable Development Goal, quality education, seeks to ensure inclusive, equitable, and quality education for all. But, Juliet, how can we talk about quality if our educational system doesn't recognize students' linguistic repertoires?
Exactly, Catalina. Educational quality can be an empty concept. It's not just about infrastructure or standardized test results. It's about creating environments where each student can learn from their own identity without having to leave behind their language, their culture, their history.
And that's where translanguaging comes in, a concept developed by Ofelia Garcia and Lee Wei. It's not just about mixing languages, but recognizing that multilingual speakers use all their linguistic resources flexibly to construct meaning.
So, validating that a student uses Spanish and English in the same sentence isn't an error. It's a legitimate learning strategy.
Exactly. And when we talk about Sustainable Development Goal 10, reduce inequalities, we are touching on something even deeper. Bilingualism policies in Colombia tend to favor urban, middle-class students with access to technology, But what about rural students? What about Afro-Colombian communities? What about migrants?
They're left out, and not just from learning English, but from future economic and social opportunities. Let's be honest, in Colombia, speaking English opens doors. But if the system only values one way of being bilingual, we're perpetuating inequality.
That's why we need decolonial pedagogies, as Catherine Walsh proposes, pedagogies that question those hegemonic models and recognize ancestral knowledge, cultural memory, and community sound ways of communicating.
Well, Catalina, we have identified the problem and understood why it's urgent, but we don't want to leave our listeners without hope. What can we do?
First, recognize that our students' linguistic repertoires are in deficiencies, but resources, those linguistic measures, those diverse accents, those oral narratives, all of that enriches the classroom where we legitimize it.
Design situated bilingual environments, right?
Exactly. Environments that start from a student's concrete reality. For example, in my research, we are implementing workshops where students create maps and their plurilingual identity, share cultural knowledge like recipes, songs, family stories in their own language and dialects, and then connect them with the English learning.
That sounds transformative, and I'm sure students feel more motivated.
Totally, because they see that their culture matters, that their voice matters, and they learn English not as a colonial imposition, but as a tool to project their own identity to the world.
And for the teachers listening to us, what would you tell them?
Start by getting to know your students. Where do they come from? What languages do they speak at home? What stories do they carry? And then dare to design activities that integrate those realities. We don't need great resources. We need intention and ethical commitment.
And also remember that this isn't just a responsibility of English teachers. It's a matter for the entire educational community, administrators, families, public policies.
Well, Juliet, I think it's time to close this first episode.
Yes, Catalina, today we talk about an enormous challenge, the gap between standardized educational policies and the linguistic and cultural diversity of our students, especially in rural contexts and with historically marginalized populations.
We saw how this challenge is connected to SDG 4, quality education, and SDG 10, reduce inequalities, and we explore solutions like translanguaging and decolonial pedagogies.
But above all, we want to leave this message. 21st century education cannot continue to be monolingual, monocultural, and exclusionary. We need classrooms that celebrate diversity, that validate all ways of being and speaking. We invite you to reflect on these ideas, to share this episode with other educators, and to implement small changes in your own classrooms. Remember, transformation begins in the everyday.
Well, hear you in the next episode of Education Without Borders. See you soon.